On an average afternoon in July, the asphalt in Phoenix, Arizona reaches 160 degrees. The air temperature holds above 106. And yet 4.5 million people live in the surrounding valley, making it one of the 10 largest metropolitan areas in the Western Hemisphere. Phoenix has no navigable river, no natural harbor, no coal, no oil, no strategic mountain pass. By every rule of how cities form, proximity to water, access to trade routes, defensible terrain, Phoenix should not exist. It is the 5th largest city in the United States, and it is built on a dare. But here is the part that makes it stranger. Phoenix is not the first civilization to try this. Around the year 200 A.D., a people now called the Hohokam began carving an irrigation system through the Salt River Valley using nothing but stone tools and their hands. Over 12 centuries, they dug roughly 250 miles of canals, channels up to 50 feet wide and 10 feet deep, and irrigated thousands of acres of corn, beans, squash, and cotton. At their peak, the Hohokam may have supported a population of 40,000 or more. They built the largest pre-Columbian irrigation system in the Western Hemisphere. And then, around 1450, they vanished. Nobody is entirely certain why. Soil depletion, drought, flood damage, some combination. The record is silent. The Pima people who came after them gave them a name that translates roughly as those who have gone, or all used up. For 400 years, their canals sat empty in the desert sun, slowly filling with debris, baking in the same relentless heat that punishes the valley today. And then an opium-addicted Confederate veteran rode through on horseback and decided to do the whole thing again. His name was Jack Swilling, born April 1st, 1830, on a plantation in Anderson, South Carolina. He had a fractured skull and a bullet lodged in his back from injuries sustained in 1854 under circumstances he never fully explained. The pain was constant and severe, and he managed it with morphine and whiskey, which made him, depending on whom you asked, either a generous visionary or a dangerous drunk. He had fought in the Civil War on both sides, serving first with the Confederates, then scouting for Union forces in the Arizona Territory. He had prospected for gold, run a saloon, operated a dance hall, and carried the mail. By 1867, he was riding express routes through the Salt River Valley, and on those rides, he noticed something. Long, linear mounds of dirt leading from the river out across the valley floor, mile after mile. He recognized them as the remains of irrigation canals. And where most people saw ruins, Swilling saw a business opportunity. On November 16, 1867, in the mining town of Wickenburg, he raised money from local prospectors and formed the Swilling Irrigating and Canal Company. The following month, he led a crew of 17 men back into the valley, and they began redigging the old Hohokam canals. By the next summer, they were harvesting wheat, barley, and corn, selling the crops to nearby army forts and mining camps that desperately needed food. Other settlers saw what Swilling had done and went, in the phrase of the time, canal crazy, grabbing shovels, filing water claims, digging their own ditches off the Salt River. A small settlement coalesced. Swilling wanted to call it Stonewall, after Stonewall Jackson. Someone else proposed Salina. But an Englishman named Darrell Duppa, who was educated enough to know his mythology, suggested they call the place Phoenix, because a new city was rising from the ashes of a former civilization. By January 1868, the name had stuck. It may be the most perfectly named city in the history of the country. Swilling claimed a quarter section of land south of what became Van Buren Street and built himself a 9-room adobe house requiring 96,000 bricks, enormous by frontier standards. He served as the settlement's first postmaster and first justice of the peace. He dug more canals. He had married a young woman of Spanish heritage named Trinidad Mejia Escalante, and together they were raising 7 children and 2 adopted Apache orphans. Swilling was, by any measure, the founder of Phoenix. And what happened to him is worth knowing, because it sets a tone for the city's story, a story in which the desert gives and the desert takes, and the timing is never quite right. In the spring of 1878, Swilling's health was failing badly. His wife suggested he take a trip to recover and to rebury the remains of an old friend killed by Apaches. While Swilling and two companions were on that journey, 3 masked men robbed a stagecoach near Wickenburg. The descriptions of the robbers roughly matched Swilling and his friends. Swilling had supposedly told drinking companions that robbing a stage would be easy money, the kind of remark a man in pain and in his cups might make without meaning it. He was arrested. They had to carry him to the stagecoach that took him to the federal jail in Yuma, where conditions were miserable. The August heat was brutal, and his combination of narcotics, alcohol, and old injuries finished him off. Jack Swilling died on August 12, 1878, at 48 years old. A few weeks later, authorities identified and arrested the real stage robbers. Swilling had been innocent. The founder of Phoenix left behind a widow, a handful of children, and a city that was already forgetting him. Phoenix at that point was barely a dot on anyone's map. The 1870 census had counted 240 people in the entire Salt River Valley. By 1880, the city of Phoenix had grown to about 1,600. It was a farming town, irrigated fields of cotton, alfalfa, grain, and citrus spreading out from the canal network. The territorial legislature made it the county seat in 1871, and in 1889 moved the territorial capital from Prescott to Phoenix, a political prize that gave the town a layer of government employment and civic importance it couldn't have generated on its own. By the 1880s, a railroad spur connected Phoenix to the Southern Pacific's transcontinental line 30 miles to the south, making it a market town for the surrounding territory. By 1895, the spur extended northward beyond the Mogollon Rim, and Phoenix became the commercial gateway for an enormous stretch of the Arizona interior, goods going in, produce coming out. But it remained small, hot, isolated, and dependent on a river that could flood violently one year and dry to a trickle the next. The canals that settlers had dug were adequate for a few thousand acres, but they couldn't control the Salt River itself. A string of severe droughts in the 1890s nearly destroyed the valley's farms and the town along with them. The Hohokam had faced the same problem. They, too, lacked the ability to store water against drought, and they had vanished. Phoenix seemed headed the same direction. In 1894, a Chicago attorney named J.C. Adams arrived in Phoenix. He was unimpressed by the accommodations in a city of roughly 5,000. Using his financial connections, he raised the money to build the Adams Hotel, a 4-story, 200-room wooden building that opened in 1896 and brought, as the local newspaper put it, complete equipment and lavish appointments to a dusty frontier town. The Adams Hotel became the political and social center of Phoenix, the place where territorial business was conducted, where deals were struck over dinner, where visiting dignitaries saw something that looked just slightly like a real city. It burned to the ground in 1910 and was promptly rebuilt. That cycle, construction, destruction, reconstruction, would become a Phoenix habit. But the real turning point wasn't a hotel. It was a dam. By the late 1890s, farmers in the Salt River Valley understood that their future depended on capturing spring floods and storing water for summer use. Private efforts to raise the money failed. Then, in 1902, President Theodore Roosevelt signed the Newlands Reclamation Act, creating the United States Reclamation Service and authorizing federal construction of irrigation projects across the arid West. Arizona's farmers organized the Salt River Valley Water Users Association, put their land up as collateral, and lobbied hard. In 1903, the Salt River Project was selected as one of the first 5 federal reclamation projects in the country. The dam would be built in a narrow canyon 80 miles northeast of Phoenix at the confluence of the Salt River and Tonto Creek, the same site that a Maricopa County survey team had identified as promising back in 1889. The problem was getting there. The dam site was 60 miles from the nearest railhead through some of the most rugged terrain in Arizona. Before a single stone could be laid, construction crews, many of them Apache Indians who knew the land, had to build a 64-mile road through mountains and canyons. Phoenix contributed $67,500 toward the road, the largest share of any valley town, bonding itself for the purpose. That road, completed in late 1904 at a cost of over $200,000, became known as the Apache Trail, and it was itself an engineering marvel. Then the real work began. A Texas firm, the John O'Rourke Company, won the construction contract with a bid of $1.1 million. 26 Italian stonecutters were brought from Pittsburgh to carve the dressed limestone blocks that would give the dam its distinctive facade. The Reclamation Service wanted its flagship project to emanate, in its own words, a distinct sense of permanence, stability, grandeur, and workmanship. Massive cableways, 1,200 feet long, delivered blocks weighing up to 10 tons across the canyon. Workers lived in 3 segregated construction camps near the site. Engineers built a temporary hydropower plant to generate electricity on site, reducing the need to haul fuel oil over the Apache Trail. One engineer remarked that white men wouldn't stay on the job because they couldn't spend their money fast enough in such a remote location. Devastating floods in 1905 and 1906 washed away equipment and set the project back months. The dam took 6 years to build. When it was finished in February 1911, it contained 344,000 cubic yards of masonry and stood 280 feet high and 723 feet long, the tallest masonry dam in the world. On March 18, 1911, former President Theodore Roosevelt traveled by automobile over the Apache Trail to dedicate the dam that bore his name. Nearly 1,000 people followed in the dust. At 5:48 in the evening, Roosevelt pressed a button and released a jet of water down the canyon. In his impromptu speech, he ranked the dam alongside the Panama Canal as one of the proudest achievements of his administration. Behind the dam, Roosevelt Lake was filling. More than 1 million acre-feet of water, enough to irrigate the Salt River Valley's farms for 4 years without replenishment. The dam cost $10 million, a staggering sum in 1911, owed by the valley's farmers to the federal government. It would take 44 years to pay it off. The Salt River project made its final payment on October 21, 1955, by which time the dam had already repaid its cost many thousands of times over in irrigated crops, hydroelectric power, and the simple fact of Phoenix's continued existence. The dam changed everything. It gave Phoenix what the Hohokam had never had, control over the river. The water could be stored, measured, released on schedule. The desert could be farmed year-round. The city had its insurance policy. And Phoenix began to grow. Not spectacularly, not yet, but steadily. The population climbed from about 11,000 in 1910 to 29,000 in 1920 to 48,000 in 1930. Cotton became the dominant crop, long staple Pima cotton, prized for the exceptional strength and fineness of its fibers. During the First World War, demand for cotton tire cord surged, and the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, unwilling to depend on foreign suppliers, purchased thousands of acres west of Phoenix to grow its own. The company built housing, stores, and infrastructure for its workers, and an entire town materialized out of cotton fields. It is still called Goodyear. Cattle ranching expanded across the open range. Citrus orchards, grapefruit, oranges, lemons spread along the canal routes, shipping fruit by rail to markets across the country. Arizona's economy was said to rest on the 5 C's: copper, cattle, cotton, citrus, and climate. And Phoenix profited from all but the first. By the 1920s, winter tourism was becoming the unofficial 6th C, as wealthy Easterners and Midwesterners discovered that Phoenix in January offered warm sunshine, dry air, and the romance of the desert at a time when Chicago was buried in snow. The 1920s brought a building boom that gave Phoenix its first real skyline. In 1924, a German immigrant named George Lures, who had arrived in the valley in the 1860s as a wheelwright and gradually accumulated commercial real estate, built the Lures Building at Central Avenue and Jefferson Street. 10 stories tall, designed by the El Paso firm Trost & Trost, it cost $553,000 and was the tallest building in Phoenix, and, people claimed, the largest commercial building between El Paso and Los Angeles. On its upper floors, the exclusive Arizona Club occupied 4 levels of dining rooms, lounges, a library, and bedrooms. A private men's club where most of the city's business and political decisions were brokered over whiskey and cigars. 5 years later, Lures completed the 14-story Lures Tower on the same block, an Art Deco structure with a lobby of imported French marble and brass detailing. Lures himself died that same year at 81, but the buildings endured, and they still stand today. In December 1928, the Hotel Westward Ho opened, 16 stories, the tallest building in Arizona, a distinction it would hold for more than 30 years. Developer Webb, then just starting out, reportedly got one of his first jobs hanging doors during its construction. And then, in February 1929, the Arizona Biltmore opened, 8 miles northeast of the city. Designed by Albert Chase MacArthur, a Harvard-trained architect who had once worked as a draftsman for Frank Lloyd Wright, the Biltmore was built with more than 250,000 precast concrete textile blocks, a construction technique MacArthur had paid Wright $10,000 to consult on, only to discover that Wright didn't actually own a patent on the system. The resulting feud between the two architects would simmer for decades, but the hotel was magnificent. A desert palace with polo fields, a golf course, and a second largest in the world gold leaf ceiling. Over 600 invitations were sent for the grand opening. No one wanted to be left out, and the hotel had to recreate the opening gala 3 nights running to accommodate everyone. William Wrigley, Jr., the chewing gum magnate and an original investor, bought the Biltmore after the stock market crash 8 months later for a fraction of its construction cost. The Wrigley family would own it for over 40 years. Clark Gable and Carol Lombard stayed there regularly. Irving Berlin supposedly wrote White Christmas beside its swimming pool. The Arizona Biltmore announced to the world that Phoenix was a destination, a place for money, leisure, and sunlight. It also demonstrated something about Phoenix's relationship with timing. The city has a recurring habit of opening magnificent things just before disaster strikes, and somehow surviving anyway. But sunlight alone does not make a city. What Phoenix needed more than tourists was capital, and in 1933, at the worst possible moment, it got the most important banker in its history. Walter Bimson was the son of a blacksmith, educated in economics at the University of Colorado, the University of Chicago, and Harvard. He was working at Harris Trust and Savings Bank in Chicago when he traveled to the Southwest and fell in love with the landscape. That year, Valley Bank, a small Phoenix institution whose deposits had been battered by the Depression, hired Bimson as its president. His first act was remarkable. He told his loan officers to start lending immediately, in the middle of the worst financial crisis in American history, when every other bank in the country was calling in loans and shutting its doors. Walter Bimson told his people to put money into the community and get buying underway. He became one of the first bankers in Arizona to offer FDIC insurance, one of the first to aggressively use the new FHA home loan program, and one of the first to treat consumer lending as a growth strategy rather than a risk. Within 4 years, he had multiplied Valley Bank's deposits 5.5 times. By 1940, they were 7 times what they had been when he arrived. Valley National Bank, as it became known, expanded across the state, opening branches in abandoned saloons and Quonset huts in small towns along the Mexican border and up into Indian country. Over the next 40 years, Bimson and his brother Carl grew the bank's deposits from $6 million to $377 million. Senator Barry Goldwater would later say the bank's growth parallels the explosive progress of Arizona. In 1972, Valley National Bank built the 40-story Valley Center in downtown Phoenix. It remains the tallest building in Arizona. Bimson had essentially financed a city into existence. And then the war came, and the war changed everything. Arizona's warm weather, clear skies, vast empty land, cheap labor, low taxes, and proximity to California made it irresistible to the military. In February 1941, the city of Phoenix purchased 1,440 acres of land for $40,000 and leased it to the federal government for $1 a year. That land became Luke Field, named after Frank Luke, Jr., a Phoenix-born World War I fighter ace and Medal of Honor recipient who had been killed in action at 21. Williams Field opened to the southeast. Falcon Field was built for British Royal Air Force pilot training. Thunderbird Field trained American cadets. By 1943, there were at least 5 major military airfields in or near the Phoenix Valley, training tens of thousands of pilots and air crews. The manufacturing economy exploded. Arizona's gross income from manufacturing rose from $17 million in 1940 to $85 million by 1945, a 5-fold increase in 5 years. AI Research Manufacturing Company set up operations to build aircraft components, an enterprise that would eventually evolve into Honeywell Aerospace. And the soldiers, thousands and thousands of young men from the Midwest and the East Coast, experienced the desert winter for the first time. They trained under blue skies in January while their families shoveled driveways back in Ohio and Pennsylvania. They noted the sunshine, the space, the cheap land, the casual lifestyle. Many of them liked what they saw. Several hundred German and Italian prisoners of war who had been interned in camps near Phoenix liked it so much they chose to stay after 1945 rather than return to their homelands. After the war, the veterans came back. They brought wives, children, ambitions, and VA-backed mortgages. The city's population nearly doubled between 1940 and 1950, from 65,414 to 106,818. But Phoenix in the late 1940s was still, in many ways, a small town with a big-town population arriving faster than it could absorb. The city government had become corrupt, entangled with gambling interests and organized prostitution. In 1949, a group of businessmen, including a department store heir named Barry Goldwater, organized a reform slate and swept the city council elections. Goldwater's family had been in Arizona since before statehood. His grandfather, a Polish-Jewish immigrant, had established a mercantile business in Prescott in 1859, and the family's department store had become the most prestigious in the state. The 1949 reform gave Phoenix a professionalized city manager government, and the new city manager, Ray Wilson, stayed for over 11 years, providing a continuity that proved invaluable as the city hurtled into its era of extraordinary growth. Goldwater, who found he liked politics, won a U.S. Senate seat in 1952 and would run for president in 1964. The same year the reformers took over City Hall, Motorola chose Phoenix as the site for a new research and development center for military electronics. The company was drawn by the business-friendly government, the proximity to defense suppliers in New Mexico and Southern California, the potential for engineering programs at Arizona State College, and, of course, the climate. Motorola's arrival in 1948 was the seed of what would become Phoenix's high-tech industry, the beginning of the Silicon Desert. Intel, McDonnell Douglas, and other firms followed over the next 2 decades. But the factor that truly detonated Phoenix's growth was not a company or a politician or a bank. It was a machine. Before the mid-1950s, most homes and offices in Phoenix relied on swamp coolers, evaporative cooling devices that worked tolerably in dry heat but couldn't bring a room below about 85 degrees. Summers were brutal. Anybody who could afford to leave Phoenix in July did. The city was, effectively, a winter town, popular from October to April, endurable from May to September. The Adams Hotel had advertised itself in 1928 as cooled by refrigeration, but that technology was expensive, industrial, and available only to grand hotels and movie theaters. Ordinary people sweated. Then refrigerated air conditioning became affordable for ordinary people. The Gettle brothers, local manufacturers, patented more than 100 improvements that made residential units cheaper, more efficient, and mass-producible. Del Webb, the construction magnate, put Gettle air conditioners in every home he built. By the late 1950s, refrigerated air was standard in new Phoenix construction, and the numbers tell the story with the precision of a seismograph. In 1940, Phoenix had 65,000 people. In 1950, it had 107,000. By 1960, one decade after affordable air conditioning arrived, the city's population was 439,170. It had more than quadrupled. In 1959 alone, Phoenix saw more new construction than it had in the entire 3 decades from 1914 to 1946. In May 1953, a Phoenix businessman named Neil Fox paid a $1,000 licensing fee and opened the first ever McDonald's franchise on Central Avenue near Indian School Road, the first McDonald's outside the original Brothers operation in San Bernardino. It was also the first to feature the Golden Arches. That a fast food franchise chose Phoenix for its first expansion tells you everything about where the smart money thought the growth was heading. A city that had existed for nearly a century as a modest agricultural hub became, in 10 years, a sprawling Sun Belt metropolis. Air conditioning didn't just make Phoenix more comfortable. Air conditioning made Phoenix possible. No one understood this new Phoenix better than Del Webb. Born in Fresno, California in 1899, Webb had come to Arizona at 28 to recover from a near-fatal case of typhoid fever he'd caught during a semi-pro baseball game at San Quentin Prison. He started a construction company in 1928 with 1 concrete mixer, 10 wheelbarrows, 20 shovels, and 10 picks. By the 1940s, he was one of the largest contractors in the Southwest. He built Luke Air Force Base. He built the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas after Bugsy Siegel was murdered. He co-owned the New York Yankees for 14 years during their glory days. He was a deal maker and a reader of markets. And in the late 1950s, he read the biggest market shift in American demographic history, the retirement of the GI generation. On 20,000 acres of former cotton farmland northwest of Phoenix, Webb built Sun City. 5 air-conditioned model homes, a shopping center, a recreation center, and a golf course, all finished and ready before the first buyer walked through the door. He advertised nationally on radio and television and in the Saturday Evening Post. The grand opening was January 1st, 1960. Webb's team expected 10,000 visitors over the 3-day weekend. 100,000 showed up. Traffic jammed for miles. The smallest model home was 850 square feet and sold for $8,500, $10 a square foot. In that opening weekend, 237 homes were sold. Webb had expected to sell 300 in the first year. 2 years later, he was on the cover of Time magazine. Sun City was the first large-scale, age-restricted, master-planned retirement community in the United States, and it changed the demographic equation of Phoenix forever. Webb understood something that no one else in real estate had fully grasped. Retirees didn't want to slow down. They wanted sunshine, golf courses, recreation centers, clubs, neighbors their own age, and affordable housing in a state with no income tax on Social Security benefits. Phoenix could offer all of that. Sun City eventually grew to more than 37,000 residents, and its model was replicated across the Sun Belt, in Florida, in Texas, in Southern California. But Phoenix got there first. By 1970, Phoenix had 581,000 people. By 1980, nearly 790,000. During the 1950s alone, the city had annexed nearly 95 square miles of surrounding land. In the 1960s, it annexed another 135. The freeways came. Interstate 17 running north-south, Interstate 10 running east-west. And the city sprawled outward across the desert floor, consuming farmland and open desert at a rate that made urban planners wince and developers rich. The population density remained remarkably low. Phoenix covered more square miles than Philadelphia, but had a fraction of the density. It was a city built around the automobile, designed for the horizontal, governed by people who believed that growth was the natural condition and regulation was the obstacle. By 1980, Maricopa County had grown by more than 700% since 1940. That kind of growth is not organic. It is engineered by banks, by builders, by water policy, by a political class that made expansion easier than any other city in America. But all of it, every subdivision, every golf course, every swimming pool, every green lawn in the desert, depended on water. And by the 1960s, the Salt River Project and its chain of dams, as critical as they were, could not keep pace with the thirst of a city that was adding tens of thousands of people every year. Phoenix needed more water, a lot more. The idea of bringing Colorado River water to central Arizona had been discussed since the early 20th century. Arizona had initially refused to sign the Colorado River Compact of 1922, which divided the river's water among 7 states. So suspicious was Arizona of California's intentions that in 1934, when California began building Parker Dam downstream, Arizona's governor declared martial law and dispatched a National Guard infantry unit to monitor construction. The troops commandeered a ferry boat to inspect the dam site, and newspaper punsters dubbed it the Arizona Navy. Arizona eventually ratified the compact in 1944, but the legal and political battles over its Colorado River allocation continued for decades. In 1964, the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Arizona versus California finally gave the state a defined share. 4 years later, the Colorado River Basin Project Act authorized construction of the Central Arizona Project, a 336-mile canal that would divert water from Lake Havasu near the California border across the desert to Phoenix and on to Tucson. It was the most expensive project the Bureau of Reclamation had ever undertaken. Construction began in 1973 at Lake Havasu, where 6 pumps of 66,000 horsepower each lifted water 824 feet from the lake into a 7-mile tunnel bored through the Buckskin Mountains. From there, the water flowed through an open canal, 80 feet across at the top, 24 feet across the bottom, lined with 3.5-inch concrete panels. Across the desert, uphill the entire way, lifted by 14 pumping plants through a total elevation gain of nearly 3,000 feet. The system used 2.5 million megawatt-hours of electricity per year, making it the single largest power consumer in Arizona. The first Colorado River water reached Phoenix in November 1985. The full system was declared substantially complete in 1993. The final cost exceeded $4 billion. Consider what this means. To sustain a city in a place where no city should exist, the state of Arizona spent $4 billion to build a 336-mile artificial river that pumps water uphill across a desert, using more electricity than most small countries consume. The Central Arizona Project now supplies water to over 1.8 million people in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Without it, the city as it exists today would be impossible. And the canals. This is the part that catches you. The canals that carry this water, and the canals of the Salt River Project before it, still follow in many places the same routes that the Hohokam dug by hand more than 1,000 years ago. The Arizona Canal, one of the largest in the system, traces a path that overlays an ancient Hohokam channel. Drive through Phoenix today and you will cross these canals constantly. Concrete-lined channels of blue-green water sliding through a landscape of strip malls, subdivisions, and six-lane roads. They are the most underappreciated feature of the city. They are also the only reason the city is there. Phoenix entered the 21st century as a juggernaut. Its population topped 1.3 million in 2000 and 1.6 million by 2020, the fifth largest city in America, ahead of Philadelphia. The metropolitan area was closing in on 5 million. The real estate market was among the hottest in the country, with new subdivisions pushing deep into the desert in every direction. Then came 2008, and the subprime mortgage crisis hit Phoenix harder than almost any city in America. Home prices plummeted roughly 55% from their peak. Foreclosure signs sprouted across the sprawl like desert wildflowers after rain. The city that had been built on growth, that had never known anything but growth, that had structured its entire economy and identity around the assumption that people would keep coming, suddenly stopped. It recovered. Of course it recovered. It has always recovered, which is both the city's great strength and its most dangerous habit. By 2015, the growth engine was running again. The construction cranes were back, and Phoenix was once more among the fastest-growing cities in the nation. The metro area's gross domestic product surpassed $360 billion by the early 2020s. Semiconductor manufacturers, data centers, and logistics companies were pouring investment into the valley. But the recovery happened against a backdrop that would have made Jack Swilling pause and Walter Bimson recalculate. The Colorado River is shrinking. Lake Mead, the reservoir behind Hoover Dam that supplies much of the river's downstream allocation, has been declining for 2 decades. The 7 states that share the river have been forced into increasingly painful negotiations over who takes cuts and how deep they go. Arizona, which holds junior water rights on the Colorado compared to California, has already agreed to significant reductions. The Central Arizona Project, that $4 billion lifeline, delivers less water than it was designed to carry. Groundwater levels are falling in parts of the valley. In 2023, Arizona announced it would no longer approve new housing developments in the Phoenix area that rely solely on groundwater, a decision that sent a tremor through the real estate market and raised a question that had been hovering, unasked, for decades. Meanwhile, the heat is getting worse. Maricopa County now records over 300 heat-related deaths in some years. The urban heat island effect, all that concrete, all that asphalt, all those rooftops, adds degrees that the surrounding desert does not experience. July nights in central Phoenix sometimes fail to drop below 95 degrees. This is a city where the infrastructure of daily life, the sidewalks, the bus stops, the parking lots, can become genuinely dangerous for months at a time. And yet, people keep coming. They come for the jobs, the affordable housing, the 300 days of sunshine, the lifestyle that first drew veterans after the war and retirees after Webb. They come for the same reasons people have always come to Phoenix, because it offers the promise of space, of reinvention, of a life lived outdoors and unencumbered by the density and the winters and the old hierarchies of the cities they left behind. They come because Phoenix has always been a city that says yes. Yes to growth, yes to development, yes to the idea that engineering and enterprise can overcome geography. The Hohokam said yes, too, for over 1,000 years. Their canals still carry water through the city that rose from their ruins, running the same courses through the desert, lined now with concrete instead of packed earth, feeding not cornfields but swimming pools, not villages but a metropolitan area of 5 million souls. Whether the current version of this experiment outlasts the Hohokams, whether the water holds, whether the heat is managed, whether $4 billion worth of canal and pump can sustain a permanent civilization in a place that bakes at 120 degrees, is a question that Phoenix has been asking since the afternoon Jack Swilling looked at a line of dirt mounds in 1867 and decided they were worth digging out again. Nobody answered it then. Nobody has answered it yet. The canals just keep running.